David Okwara stood by the large window of his mansion, gazing out at the sprawling city below. His reflection in the glass was the image of success, a tall, handsome man in his early 30s, dressed in a tailored suit that exuded wealth and power. But behind those sharp features, his dark eyes betrayed a different story, a story of loneliness, disillusionment, and a yearning for something real. The mansion he called home had every luxury imaginable. It was a place where expensive wine flowed like water, where parties filled the halls, and where people treated him like a king. And yet, despite all of it, David felt an emptiness that nothing could fill. He had everything the world could offer, except love. His wealth had always been a double-edged sword. Women flocked to him, attracted not to his kindness, his intellect, or his humor, but to the money he so effortlessly commanded. They were drawn to the life he could offer them, not to the man he truly was. David had grown weary of the shallow flattery, the insincere smiles, the empty compliments. No one truly saw him. The latest woman to enter his life had made that painfully clear. Sophia was beautiful, charming, and captivating, but her motives were transparent. She wanted the lavish life that came with being his partner, the designer clothes, the luxury vacations, the power and influence. It didn't take long for David to see through her act. One evening, after a romantic dinner at an upscale restaurant, she had confessed with a cold smile, "I know what I'm getting into. You're rich, and I like it. I'm not going to pretend otherwise." David had been stunned, not by her honesty, but by the blatant way she had reduced their relationship to an exchange of wealth for affection. That night, he walked alone through his mansion, feeling more isolated than ever. "Is this what my life has become?" he muttered to himself, staring at the opulent furnishings that seemed to mock his despair. He couldn't escape the feeling that the people around him only valued the surface of his life. No one cared for who he was beneath the wealth and prestige. As he stood there, alone in the vastness of his home, something shifted within him. He could no longer continue this way. He was tired of the masks, the pretenses, the lies. He wanted something real. Something pure. "I need to know if anyone would love me without the money," he thought. "Someone who cares about the real me, not the man they see on TV or in the tabloids." The thought consumed him, gnawing at him day after day. He longed for a connection that wasn't based on his fortune. He needed to know if there was someone out there who would love him for who he was, not for what he had. In his mind, the answer seemed simple: disappear. David spent the next few days contemplating the idea. He was a master of reinvention, a man who could vanish without a trace if he so desired. And so, he made a decision. He would leave behind everything: the mansion, the business empire, the public life. He would disappear. But not just in the usual way. No, this time, he would blend in with the people he had long overlooked. He would experience life from a different perspective. He would become one of them, the ones who lived without wealth, without privilege. David began preparing for his transformation. He gathered the few belongings he would need, packed a bag, and hired a discreet driver to take him to a remote location. He couldn't risk anyone knowing where he was going. He shaved his head to rid himself of his signature look and exchanged his designer suits for the rags of a homeless man. A simple, rugged jacket, frayed jeans, and scuffed shoes would do. He had no need for money, he would rely on the kindness of strangers to survive. But what worried him the most wasn't the discomfort or the challenges he would face on the streets, it was the loneliness. Would anyone care for him? Would anyone see him, not as a beggar, but as a person? And if they did, how would he know if it was for him or for the illusion of him? As the car drove him further away from his life, David felt the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. For the first time in years, he felt free. He didn't know what awaited him, but he was determined to find out. David's life as a billionaire had been a carefully crafted illusion. The clothes, the cars, the parties, it was all a facade, a series of distractions designed to keep people from looking too closely at who he really was. But as he stepped out of the black luxury car and into the streets, all those distractions faded away. The reality of life without privilege hit him like a cold wave. The streets were not kind to him. The world he had once been shielded from was rough and unrelenting. David quickly realized that his polished demeanor and natural confidence had no place here. He was no longer the powerful businessman, he was just another man struggling to survive. He found himself at a dilapidated, run-down hotel on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. The room was small, with peeling wallpaper and a single dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The bed was uncomfortable, the sheets thin and threadbare. But it was a far cry from the silk sheets in his mansion. For the first time in a long while, David could no longer escape into the comfort of luxury. He took a long, hard look at himself in the cracked mirror. His sharp, well-groomed features now seemed foreign, out of place. His hair had been shaved down to a stubble, and his clothes were unkempt and torn. He no longer looked like the man he used to be, but rather someone who had fallen through the cracks. As night fell, David made his way into the heart of the city. The streets were alive with people, some working, others simply trying to survive. The contrast between his former world and this one was glaring. He had once moved through the world as a master, a man whose every need was met with ease. Now, he had to beg for food, for shelter, and for respect. David sat on a cold bench, feeling a mixture of shame and relief. His pride told him to stand tall, to keep his head high. But the reality of his situation was different. No one was interested in his story. No one saw him as anything but a beggar. He soon found himself at the entrance of a small cafe, the scent of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air. His stomach growled, and he instinctively reached into his pocket, only to remember there was no money. He hadn't thought this through. As he stood there, debating what to do, the door to the cafe swung open, and a woman stepped out. She was young, in her 20s, with a bright smile and eyes that sparkled with warmth. She noticed David immediately, sitting alone on the bench, looking out of place. "Hey, you look like you could use some food," she said, her voice kind but not condescending. David blinked, surprised by her offer. It had been days since anyone had spoken to him with kindness, and even longer since anyone had noticed him. He tried to mask his relief with a nod, not wanting to appear too vulnerable. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice hoarse. "Nonsense," she said, walking over to him. "You look like you haven't eaten in days. Come inside, I'll get you something." Her name was Amora, and she worked at the cafe. A student by day, a waitress by night. She was the kind of person David had never taken the time to know, the kind who didn't have much but gave freely to those who needed it. And she had no idea who he really was. Amora didn't ask for a name, didn't make any assumptions. She simply sat with him, chatting about the weather, about the small joys of life, and about her dreams of someday owning a cafe of her own. David listened, mesmerized by her genuine spirit. She wasn't interested in his wealth, nor did she seem to see him as a charity case. She treated him like a person, not a project. As they ate together, David found himself laughing, something he hadn't done in a long time. Amora's easy nature and warmth made him feel comfortable in a way that no one ever had before. She wasn't trying to get anything from him. She just wanted to help. When they finished, she stood up, offering him a friendly smile. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said before turning to walk back into the cafe. David sat there for a long time, staring at the empty plate in front of him. He couldn't help but feel a strange sense of gratitude. For the first time in a while, he felt like he wasn't invisible. For the first time, someone cared about him simply because he was a person. Not because of his money. But as much as he wanted to believe it, a nagging voice in the back of his mind reminded him that it couldn't be real. What if Amora was just being kind out of pity? What if, when she discovered who he really was, she'd turn away in disgust? David quickly shoved those thoughts aside. For the first time, he had found someone who treated him like he mattered. And he couldn't bear to ruin it by revealing the truth just yet. Days turned into weeks as David's new life unfolded before him. He found a rhythm in his existence, moving from one day to the next with a quiet determination. Each morning, he woke up in his small hotel room, the faded walls a stark reminder of how far he had come from his former life. By day, he wandered the streets, getting to know the people around him. By night, he returned to the same cafe, where Amora continued to surprise him with her generosity and kindness. Every time he walked through the door, her smile was like a beacon of light in the murky fog of his new world. She had grown to expect him, and he had grown to expect her. Their conversations became longer, deeper. They talked about everything, about the struggles of daily life, about dreams, about love, and even about loss. Amora had a way of making David feel seen in a way no one ever had before. She didn't ask him about his past, and he didn't offer it. Instead, they spoke as equals, two people finding comfort in each other's company. One evening, as the sky painted itself with the warm hues of dusk, Amora sat down across from David after a long day at work. There was something different in the air, a quiet anticipation that hummed between them. "Tell me, David," Amora said, stirring her cup of tea absent-mindedly, "why did you end up on the streets?" David's heart skipped a beat. He had heard the question coming. It wasn't that she hadn't asked it before, but this time, something in her tone made it feel more pressing, more personal. David leaned back, looking out the window, his thoughts far away for a moment. "It's complicated," he said, his voice thick with a secret he hadn't shared with anyone. "But I guess I needed to get away from everything I knew. From all the expectations. The people. The lies." Amora didn't press him further. She simply nodded, understanding more than he had expected. Life can be overwhelming, can't it? Especially when you're trying to figure out who you are, apart from all the noise. David looked at her, surprised by the depth of her insight. She seemed to understand his inner conflict better than he could put into words. But something tugged at him, a quiet reminder of the truth he had hidden from her. He hadn't planned for this to happen. He hadn't planned to care about her this much. The guilt crept in again. Every time he looked into her eyes, every time she smiled at him with such sincerity, David felt like he was betraying her. She deserved the truth. She deserved to know who he really was. But the fear of losing her, the fear that she would look at him differently if she knew, held him back. He wasn't ready to take that step, not yet. Still, he couldn't deny the growing feelings within him. With each passing day, it became harder to ignore the truth he had fallen for her. Amora, on the other hand, had also begun to feel something shift between them. She found herself thinking about David constantly, wondering where he was when he didn't show up at the cafe or what he was doing when she didn't see him. The connection they shared was undeniable, and yet, she struggled with her own doubts. She had known many men in her life, some kind, some cruel, but David was different. There was a rawness about him, a vulnerability that intrigued her. Still, she wasn't blind to the fact that David had never fully opened up to her. She wanted to know the truth about him, about why he ended up on the streets, about who he really was. But there was something in his eyes, a wall he kept carefully constructed, that told her there was more to his story than he was willing to share. That night, as they finished their meal, Amora leaned across the table, her voice softer than usual. "David, I've noticed something about you. There's a sadness, a loneliness that I can see beneath the surface. You don't have to tell me everything, but I'd like to know more. About you. Your past. What you've been through." David's heart raced. He wanted to say the words, to tell her the truth. But the words caught in his throat. His fear, his shame, held him back. Instead, he forced a smile, his voice strained. "Maybe one day, I'll tell you everything." But that wasn't enough. Amora could see through his mask. She knew there was something he was hiding, something that kept him from being completely honest with her. In the days that followed, David found himself trapped in a cycle of emotional turmoil. The connection between him and Amora deepened, but so did his guilt. Each time they spoke, he felt himself falling further for her, and each time, he knew he was leading her down a path that would inevitably end in heartbreak. Amora, too, was struggling. She had grown to care for David in ways she hadn't expected. But her heart ached at the thought of not knowing who he really was, of not being able to fully trust the man she had come to care for. David's guilt and Amora's doubt culminated in a quiet evening, one that would change everything. The nights had begun to grow colder, the winds biting through the worn fabric of David's old jacket. As he walked through the streets, a familiar weight hung over him. The truth was eating away at him, gnawing at his soul. How much longer could he hide from Amora? How much longer could he pretend to be someone he was not? For the first time in a long while, he regretted his decision to leave his wealth behind. He had told himself it was for a noble reason, to find love based on who he truly was, to see if someone could care for the real David, not the billionaire facade. But the more time he spent with Amora, the more he realized that he could never be the man she deserved while wearing this mask. One evening, as he sat on his usual bench outside the cafe, he saw Amora coming toward him. She was walking briskly, her eyes scanning the street as she approached. But as she drew closer, David saw something he hadn't expected, a look of recognition in her eyes. And then, as though she had just seen a ghost, her expression froze. She stopped in front of him, her face pale. "David?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with disbelief. David's heart skipped a beat. She had never looked at him like this before, never with such intensity and concern. It was as if she was seeing him for the first time, as though everything had changed in an instant. I know you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You're not who you say you are you?" David's blood ran cold. He tried to hide his panic, but it was too late. The truth was already slipping through the cracks. The fear of revealing himself, of losing her, bubbled up inside him. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Amora's gaze was hard now, searching his face with a mixture of confusion and hurt. "I saw you," she said. "Earlier today. On the news. You're David Okwara. The billionaire businessman. The one who owns all those companies. The one everyone talks about." David's throat tightened. He had tried to keep his secret, but the world had a way of revealing truths when you least expected it. He hadn't realized that a casual encounter with someone from his past would expose him. His carefully constructed life had unraveled in a single moment. Amora took a step back, her face a mask of disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Why did you lie to me?" David swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words. He had imagined this moment countless times, but now that it was here, he was at a loss. He had hoped that by the time the truth came out, it wouldn't matter. That their connection would be strong enough to withstand the revelation. But now, standing before Amora, he realized just how much he had to lose. "I didn't want to hurt you," David said quietly, his voice filled with regret. "I didn't want you to see me as just another rich guy. I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who only want something from me, my money, my status. I didn't want that with you. I wanted to know if you could love me for who I am, not for what I have." Amora shook her head, her expression a mix of anger and hurt. "And you thought pretending to be a beggar would make that happen?" she asked, her voice rising with emotion. "You thought I wouldn't care that you lied to me about who you were? About everything?" David lowered his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. "I didn't know how else to find out. I didn't want to risk falling for someone who only loved the idea of me, not me. And now I see. I was wrong. I was so wrong." Amora stood in silence for a long moment, her arms crossed as she stared at him. David could see the struggle in her eyes, the hurt, the confusion. She had trusted him, and now that trust had been shattered. "You don't understand," David continued, his voice breaking. "I've never had anyone truly care about me for who I am. Not until I met you. And now I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix this." Tears welled in Amora's eyes, but she wiped them away angrily. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this, David. You lied to me. You used me. You made me feel like I was special, like I mattered, but it was all a lie." David's heart ached as he watched her retreat into herself. He had been so focused on finding real love that he had failed to see how much he was hurting her. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, suffocating him with guilt. "I'm sorry," David whispered. "I never meant for it to be this way. I never meant to hurt you." Amora shook her head, turning away from him. "I need time," she said, her voice distant. "I need to think. I don't know if I can be with someone who hides the truth from me, who can't be honest." David watched her walk away, his chest heavy with regret. She had been the one bright spot in his life, the one person who had seen him for who he truly was. And now he had lost her because of his own fear and pride. As the night grew darker, David sat alone on the bench, feeling more isolated than ever. The city around him seemed distant and cold, the same city that had once been his playground. Now, it felt like a prison. After the confrontation with Amora, David found himself alone once again in the mansion that once symbolized his success. But now, it felt hollow, a monument to the past that he could never return to. The silence in the grand house was deafening as David sat in a chair, staring at nothing, his thoughts consumed by Amora. David could remember how he had never fully grasped the harsh reality of life on the streets until he was forced to experience it firsthand. The world he had once ruled, with its polished buildings and glamorous events, seemed like a distant dream now, as he found himself navigating the gritty side of life. One evening, desperate and hungry, he approached a street food vendor, hoping for some kindness. He had nothing left but his wits and the hope that people might still see the human beneath his rough exterior. His stomach growled, reminding him of how far he'd fallen. He stood in front of the vendor's cart, where a woman was selling grilled meat and fried plantains. The smell of the food wafted through the air, making his mouth water. His heart pounded with the unfamiliar discomfort of asking for help. "Excuse me," he said, his voice tentative. "I haven't eaten all day. Could you spare a little food? Just something small." The vendor didn't even look up at first. She continued turning the skewers of meat over the flame. David repeated himself, but this time the woman's expression hardened, her face twisting with disdain. "Madman," she spat, her voice harsh, causing David to flinch. "Are your age mates not useful to themselves, and you here begging for food?" The words struck David like a slap. He stood frozen, his pride battling with the shame of the situation. But before he could speak again, the woman added, "Go get a job. You're just a nuisance here." He took a step back, stunned by the venom in her voice. His heart sank, the words cutting deeper than he expected. As he turned to leave, he overheard a group of people whispering behind him, their voices laced with judgment. "Look at him, must be a drug addict," one of them said. "They always end up like that. No one's going to help him." David's stomach churned, not from hunger, but from the weight of their words. The street was not a kind place. It was a place where judgments were made quickly, and kindness was a rare commodity. To them, he was just another lost soul, another madman to be avoided and ridiculed. The insult stung more than any physical wound he had ever experienced. David walked away, feeling every eye on him as he passed. For the first time, he truly understood the harshness of the world he had entered. No one cared who he used to be. In their eyes, he was nothing more than another person who had fallen through the cracks, a man who was as good as invisible. But the experience, as painful as it was, made him realize just how much he had taken his old life for granted. In his former world, he had never faced such ridicule, such indifference. He had been respected, admired even, and never had to question his worth. But here, on the streets, respect had to be earned, and kindness was a luxury few could afford. David knew the streets were notorious for their cruelty. They chewed people up and spit them out without a second thought. Yet, as he walked away from the food vendor, feeling humiliated and defeated, he also realized something else: he wasn't going to let this break him. He had chosen this path to understand the people he had once overlooked, and now, he was learning more than he ever had before. Despite the harshness of the streets, David had made a decision: he would survive. He would prove to himself, and to the world, that even in the face of insult and hardship, he could find a way back. One evening, after another long and grueling day on the streets, David sat on a bench, exhausted, his body aching from the unfamiliar hardships he was enduring. The sting of the food vendor's words still echoed in his mind, but he had grown accustomed to the stares, the whispers, and the assumptions people made about him. The street had become his reality now, a harsh and unforgiving world where survival was the only thing that mattered. As the evening drew on, the city around him buzzed with life, and the neon lights from nearby shops flickered in the dimming twilight. David barely noticed the sounds of the street anymore. He had become numb to it all until a voice broke through his thoughts. "Hey, you look like you could use some work." David looked up, startled. A young man, probably in his early 20s, stood in front of him, his eyes bright with an offer of something David hadn't heard in weeks: hope. The young man was casually dressed in a worn t-shirt and jeans, his hands slightly calloused, as if he had been working himself. He didn't look like the type to offer charity, but his presence seemed genuine. David hesitated for a moment, unsure of what the young man wanted from him. Was this some sort of scam? Another person looking to take advantage of him? But there was something in the stranger's eyes, something honest, that made David question his doubts. "Work?" David asked, his voice rough. "I don't know if I'm in any condition for work. I don't have a lot to offer." The young man shrugged nonchalantly. "It's not much, just some labor. We need a few extra hands for a construction project. You look like you can handle hard work. It's a day's pay, and you'll have something to eat at least. I'm not offering charity, just a chance to earn something." David stared at him for a moment, the temptation gnawing at him. A chance to work. A chance to feel useful again, to regain something of his dignity. He had nothing else to lose. "All right, I'll come with you," David said, standing up. The young man smiled, nodding in approval, and motioned for him to follow. They walked through the city, down a few alleyways, and past construction sites that were starting to wind down for the night. The young man led him to a small construction project on the outskirts of town. It was a modest site, nothing like the grandiose skyscrapers David was used to, but it was a job, something tangible. When they arrived, David's eyes took in the sight of men working on various tasks, lifting heavy materials, fixing scaffolding, and hauling bricks. The work was hard, and the men were tired, but there was a sense of camaraderie in the air. It wasn't much, but it was honest work. "Here's the deal," the young man said. "You'll help us carry materials, dig a bit, and clear some of this rubble. You'll get paid at the end of the day. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. And for tonight, it'll be a place for you to sleep. We've got some makeshift beds in the warehouse for guys who need a spot." David glanced around at the men working. There was no pride, no pretense here, just a group of people doing what they had to do to survive. He could feel a sense of humility washing over him. This was not the life he was accustomed to, but somehow, it felt real. As the night went on, David took on his tasks. The work was harder than he had imagined. His muscles ached from the physical labor, and his hands grew raw from handling rough materials. But it was the most useful he had felt in weeks. Every brick he carried, every piece of rubble he moved, brought him a strange sense of fulfillment he hadn't known he needed. The hours passed, and though the work was grueling, David found himself feeling grateful. He wasn't asking for charity, he wasn't begging for food anymore. For the first time in a long while, he was earning his keep, doing something that required effort, strength, and perseverance. It reminded him of his old life, when he used to work hard for everything he had, before the wealth and the power consumed him. At the end of the night, the young man handed David a small envelope with a few bills inside. "Here," he said. "You did good. Come back tomorrow if you want more work. The pay's decent for this area." David took the envelope, feeling the weight of it in his hand. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a step forward. He nodded in appreciation, his mind already running with thoughts of how he would spend the next day, what he would do with the money, how he would start rebuilding his life, piece by piece. "Thanks," David said quietly. "I'll be back." As he walked away, the fatigue from the day's work settled in, but it wasn't the exhaustion that had haunted him on the streets. It was a kind of tiredness that felt earned, that came from the satisfaction of doing something worthwhile. And for the first time in a long while, David felt a spark of hope. The streets had shown him their brutal side, but they had also given him a chance. A chance to remember what it was like to be truly alive, to fight for something real. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he was ready to face it. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't let her walk away. He couldn't lose her. He had to go to her on her terms this time. He had to show her that he had learned the lessons he needed to learn. His wealth no longer mattered. All that mattered now was Amora and the chance to prove to her that he was worthy of her love. With resolve in his heart, David left the mansion that had once been his sanctuary. He drove through the city, the familiar roads now seeming distant, as though he were no longer the man he had been. He parked his car outside the cafe where it had all begun, the place where Amora had first shown him kindness, where their paths had crossed in such an unexpected way. Amora hadn't just seen him for who he pretended to be, she had seen him for who he truly was. And now, he was determined to show her that same truth. No more lies, no more disguises. He needed to ask for forgiveness, not just for the deception, but for the pain he had caused her. As he stepped out of the car, dressed in his perfectly tailored suit, the contrast between his current appearance and the man he had been just a few weeks ago was undeniable. The suit gleamed in the sunlight, his polished shoes clicking on the pavement as he made his way to the cafe. But this time, it wasn't the wealth he wanted to flaunt, it was the man he had become. The bell above the cafe door jingled as David walked in, his presence immediately drawing the attention of the patrons. Amora was behind the counter, her eyes catching his as he approached. She froze, surprise flickering across her face as she saw the man who had once been a beggar standing before her in his full glory. The room seemed to hold its breath as David walked toward her. Without hesitation, he dropped to one knee, right there in the middle of the cafe, before a stunned Amora and the onlookers around them. The noise in the room quieted, and all eyes were on David. "I don't want to lose you, Amora," he said, his voice steady but filled with raw emotion. "Please forgive me and give this man a chance." David's voice cracked as he continued, the words tumbling out. "I never meant to hurt you. Please understand, I was wrong. I was afraid, and I let my fears dictate my actions. Don't let me lose you, please." Amora stood still for a moment, her heart racing as she looked down at him. The man she had once believed to be a poor beggar was now kneeling before her in his true form, a billionaire. Yet, despite the wealth he so easily displayed, there was no pride, no arrogance in his posture. There was only sincerity, vulnerability, and regret. The tears welled up in Amora's eyes as she saw the sincerity in David's face. This wasn't the same man who had lied to her. This was a man who had recognized his mistakes and was willing to humble himself to fix what he had broken. Without a word, Amora walked toward him, her heart overflowing with emotion. She reached down and gently took his hand, pulling him to his feet. And then, without thinking, she wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly, as if to reassure herself that he was really here, really sorry. "I forgive you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but her words were clear. "I forgive you, David." In that moment, the weight of everything that had come between them, the lies, the betrayal, the hurt, seemed to lift. David felt his heart swell with relief, the burden of guilt he had carried for so long finally beginning to fade. He had her forgiveness. And now, together, they would rebuild. Slowly, but surely. In the weeks that followed, David and Amora's love blossomed in the most unexpected and beautiful way. What had started as a fragile thread of trust, woven through with doubts and pain, had transformed into something deep and unwavering. They spent every moment they could together, rebuilding the foundation of their relationship on honesty, vulnerability, and love. David was determined to make up for the mistakes he had made, not with gifts or grand gestures, but with his time, attention, and unwavering support for Amora's dreams. He had discovered that love was not about wealth or status, it was about being there for the one you loved, about sharing a life built on mutual respect and understanding. One sunny afternoon, David invited Amora to his mansion. He had promised her that he would show her more of his life, and now, standing at the entrance to the estate, he felt a sense of excitement that he had never felt before. This time, when he asked her to walk through those grand gates, it wasn't to impress her with wealth or status, but to show her how far he had come not just in his career, but in his heart. Amora's eyes widened as she stepped inside, taking in the luxurious surroundings. The grand staircase, the gleaming marble floors, the towering windows, all the things that had once defined David's identity now seemed almost secondary to her. The real luxury, the real treasure, lay in the life they had started to build together. "This is incredible," Amora whispered, her voice filled with awe as she took in the beauty of the mansion. She had never been one to care about opulence, but the way David had invited her into this world made her appreciate it differently. It wasn't about showing off anymore, it was about sharing a space that had once been filled with loneliness and now radiated warmth. David smiled, watching her with a tenderness that only she could evoke. "It's just a house, Amora," he said softly. "But you make it feel like home." They wandered through the house, exploring rooms that held memories of David's old life. But each room now seemed to hold a new possibility, one that included her. They stood in front of the grand windows overlooking the city, and David turned to her, his eyes full of quiet emotion. "I want to give you something," he said, his voice earnest. "I want you to stop working part-time in the cafe. You deserve more than that. I want to see you through school, help you follow your dreams, and be there for you in every way I can. No more struggling." Amora looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "David, I can't. I want to work for it. I don't want you to feel like you're doing everything for me." "I know you want to earn it on your own," David said, taking her hand gently. "But you've already worked so hard. I want to help make things easier for you. I want to see you succeed. Whatever you dream, I'm here for it. Let me support you, Amora." Tears filled Amora's eyes as she realized how far David had come, not just in his wealth, but in his heart. He wasn't offering her money for nothing, he was offering her the chance to chase her dreams without fear. And in that moment, she knew she couldn't refuse. She had found someone who genuinely cared for her, someone who wanted to be her partner in every sense of the word. But David didn't stop there. He knew how much the cafe meant to her, how it had been a part of her dream. So, a few months later, he took another step. He opened a cafe for Amora, a space all her own, where she could pour her heart into her passion for cooking and creating a welcoming space for others. He watched her face light up as she walked through the doors of the new cafe, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You did this, for me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "For us," David corrected gently, his hand resting on her shoulder. "I want you to have everything you deserve, Amora. This is just the beginning." With the cafe running smoothly and her studies in full swing, Amora's life began to change in ways she had never imagined. David's support allowed her to focus on her education and pursue her dreams without the constant weight of financial worry. And every day, she saw the man who had been a beggar, who had humbled himself to find true love, standing beside her, proud, humble, and filled with gratitude. As they walked hand in hand through the bustling cafe one evening, David looked at Amora with quiet appreciation. "I'm so grateful for you," he said. "You've shown me what real love is. And every day, I wake up thankful for that one decision to become a beggar." Amora turned to him, her heart full. "And I'm grateful for you, David. For everything you've done. But mostly, for being real with me." David smiled, pulling her closer. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" They stood together, watching the cafe come alive with the hum of conversation, the clink of cups, and the gentle murmur of people finding comfort in the space Amora had created. It wasn't just a cafe, it was a symbol of everything they had built together, everything they had fought for. And as David held Amora in his arms, he knew that no amount of wealth or success could ever compare to the treasure he had found in her. Their love had blossomed, and now, together, they had everything they truly needed.